Good evening, it's October 8th, 2024, and this is the tropical update for Hurricane Milton. Hurricane Milton is still a very formidable hurricane. It went through a period of weakening last night due to an eyewall replacement cycle. However, in the last couple of hours, Hurricane Milton has begun to regain its Category 5 strength. And as we look here on satellite, we can see that Hurricane Milton is very, very impressive. It is a larger system than it was yesterday, and typically that's what happens after these eyewall replacement cycles is the storm typically expands in size. It temporarily weakens. However, once that eyewall replacement cycle is complete, the storm can reattain or regain some of its strength that it lost during the eyewall replacement cycle, and that is exactly what has happened in Milton. Milton at one point was a Category 4 earlier this morning. However, it is now back to Category 5 strength, and we can see here that the eye is very, very visible on the satellite, and we can see a central dense overcast look, very, very symmetric in nature with Hurricane Milton. Hurricane Milton also had a couple developments throughout the day. Hurricane Milton did show somewhat of a wobble toward the south, and it was kind of somewhat to keep an eye on, simply because these wobbles do matter as we go out in time. And as you can see here, based off of the Cancun radar, we can see that there was a wobble thrown in there earlier this afternoon. You kind of see Milton starting here, kind of just a little bit more of a dive here, and then now it's taking a more of a west east northeast motion. Now those wobbles do matter because the small differences with wobbles right now can have long range effects on where the system ends up toward the end of its life for landfall. And that is very, very important because depending on where you are, you may see different impacts. Depending if you're north or south of the circulation, could mean a world of difference when it comes to storm surge. So it's very important that we monitor these small differences. And the National Hurricane Center also recognized that there were some differences in the wobbles and adjusted the forecast cone slightly to the south. Now, hurricane hunters are currently in Hurricane Milton, and they're noticing that pressure have begun to decrease again, and pressures are beginning to fall, and that is indicative of a very strong system and a system that is also strengthening. We saw pressures early today in the 920s, and look, we already have pressures at 908, and I believe the National Hurricane Center has the pressure at about 905 millibars. So currently, Milton is moving to the east northeast, at 9 miles per hour, with maximum sustained winds of about 165 miles per hour. So we can see Hurricane Milton is definitely one of the stronger systems for this time of the year, especially for its movement. Moving east, we rarely see storms moving eastward at Category 5 strength. So I mentioned earlier today about the track. There have been some adjustments to the track. The track was a little further north earlier this morning and even last night, and that shift that we noticed and that wobble that we noticed earlier today has placed Milton a little further east than expected, and because of that, the shift in the cone has brought it a little further south. So areas like Tampa are now south of the cone. Now that doesn't mean that the cone can shift back north as well. It just means that for areas like Tampa, if you are north of the circulation, you may not be dealing with as much storm surge, depending if it was to the north of Tampa. So these small, minute differences make a world of difference depending on what type of conditions or storm surge you see. However, this is a bad indication for people in Southwest Florida, with the circulation possibly being a little further south. Areas like Fort Myers, Naples may see a larger increase in storm surge. So we have to continue to watch these developments. And I've seen it where these storms typically come from this angle, and they move a little bit more right of the cone, or a little bit more right than expected, simply because it seems as though these systems tend to veer a little bit more to the right. Now here are the latest hurricane models showing a little bit more of a trend toward the south. Earlier today we had some models a little bit further toward the north, maybe around the Tampa Bay area, but we can see here none of the hurricane models are even showing Tampa landfall. Does not mean that it cannot happen. It's just showing the trends, that the trends are showing a little bit more south of track. So we're going to keep an eye on that, and you never know that these hurricanes and these systems, it may begin to veer a little bit more to the right. So we're going to have to watch these trends and see if these trends hold up. Like I mentioned, there's a possibility that this track could move a little further north as well. But for today, the trends have been toward the south. Now we're going to look at the GFS and see what the latest GFS is saying for landfall location. We can see here that the storm is making that east-northeast movement, and it gets to about, I would say, somewhere around Bradenton or Sarasota as far as a landfall impact. I'm watching this just in real time as you guys are, and it's showing a landfall somewhere near just south of the Tampa Bay area, and that is important. Like I mentioned, if this system is north of Tampa, then it may bring some storm surge issues into the Tampa Bay area. However, if the system is a little further south of Tampa, that may spare Tampa Bay for some of the storm surge issues. So that's important, these trends, that we're continuing to monitor these trends. Now, as far as the timing goes, we've also noticed that the timing of impacts have also shifted a little further to the right as well. We're noticing now that maybe the system is a little slower in time, and we may see those impacts a little later. We were talking about tropical storm winds on the last video, maybe arriving in certain areas Wednesday morning. Now we're pushing that back a little further, maybe into Wednesday evening. So if you still haven't done those last second preparations, you may actually be able to even squeeze them out on your Wednesday. However, anything after that, I'm going to stress, needs to be complete. Evacuations need to be complete. If you're on the coast, the southwest coast of Florida, if you're in any portions of the west coast of Florida and you do not feel safe, you're in an evacuation zone, I would highly suggest you take the advice of local authorities and you evacuate, because storm surge is the #1 killer. And some of these estimates of storm surge are very, very high. Some of these estimates are not survivable. So if you're near the ocean, it is imperative that you evacuate. And like I mentioned in the last video, you don't have to drive 5 hours to evacuate. If you have relatives that live further inland, you can just stay with them and ride the storm out there if you feel safe. However, remove yourself from the water. That is the main issue here with these storms. Storm surge and water is the #1 killer. You can survive some of the wind, but it's the water that's really going to kill you. So if you don't feel safe, if you're in an evacuation zone, you will and you should evacuate. Now we're talking about watches and warnings here. We can see that hurricane watches have been posted for the west coast of Florida and also now the east coast of Florida. We see watches as far north as about Jacksonville, south all the way until you get somewhere in there around Sebastian Inlet. And of course on the west coast of Florida we have hurricane warnings. Now those hurricane warnings for the east coast are there because we do anticipate Milton moving across the state and possibly bringing hurricane force winds to some of the regions on the east coast of Florida. So it is very imperative that we're listening, and we're definitely taking this seriously, as we have a very, very strong storm on our hands and possibly going to be a stronger system than anticipated if it falls a little south of the track. If the storm continues to trend toward a southern solution, we may have a system that feels less impact of shear and maybe a little bit stronger than anticipated. So it's something that we really have to monitor. We have to make sure that our hurricane preparations are in place and that we're implementing them. You do not want to get caught in a storm that is very, very strong like this. So be safe, everyone. Like I mentioned before, definitely take a look at what's going on your weather apps, your local authorities, the National Hurricane Center. Please be safe. That is it. And I should have a video for you guys tomorrow early in the day. Have a great one.